A classroom where teachers are motivated to inspire their students can become a reality if we tie teacher salaries to student performance on standardized tests. This can transform the educational landscape for the better. Good morning, Honorable Judge, clever opponents, and my wonderful team members. I'm here to support the motion that we believe that salary of teachers should change every year based on the performance of the students in the standardized test. A standardized test is a large-scale assessment where all test takers answer the same questions in the same way and are scored consistently. This allows for the comparison of student performance across groups or individuals. We would apply this rule by saying that we would do background checks for students that have some disabilities or are just unwilling to have good test results. So opposition cannot say that some students have mental disabilities that will make the teacher's salaries decrease. I will talk about this in my speech. And we can base salary off of the improvement of scores. So firstly, I'm going to talk about my burden, then my arguments. Lastly, I'll give my preamps and conclusion. Our burden in this debate is to prove that linking teacher salaries to student performance enhances accountability, motivates educators to improve their teaching methods, and ultimately leads to better educational outcomes for students. So firstly, without a performance-based salary structure, there's little incentive for teachers to prioritize student outcomes. In schools where teacher salaries remain static regardless of student performance, educators may lack the motivation to innovate or engage students actively. This can result in a culture where teaching becomes a routine rather than dynamic with less focus on student needs and academic growth. Consequently, student achievement may decline as disengaged teachers are less likely to inspire or challenge their students.
Why, ma'am?
Huh?
Why, ma'am?
Not accepted. Additionally, without accountabilities, students may fail to address underperformance among teachers. Who do not effectively engage in their students might continue in their positions without consequences, leading to stagnation or educational quality. We recognize that some students may face challenges that affect their test performance, such as disabilities or lack of
Please
motivation.
engage.
Sure.
Why is comparison good if students will constantly compare themselves with others and receive low self-esteem? And this is actively worse on your side because tests will become much more important at the end because it chooses the salary of a teacher. Please respond.
Okay, so you're saying that students' self-esteem will lower, right? But this can happen in your scenario also because we all have standardized tests, but we're just not linking it to the student performances. So back to my speech. We can recognize that some students may face challenges that affect their task performance, such as disabilities or lack of motivation. To address this, we propose implementing background checks and support systems for students with special needs. This ensures that teachers are not unfairly penalized for factors beyond their control, allowing for adjustments in performance evaluations based on individual circumstances. My opponents might argue that this system encourages teaching the test. While there is a concern that teachers might focus solely on test preparation, the opposite can be also true. Also, we can monitor what the teacher is teaching, and if they're directly talking about the test, we can deal with this. Also, teachers are not given the test before the day that students are quizzed, so teachers do not know what is on the test. Of course, we can modify the test to the teacher's teachings. In our best case scenario, implementing a performance-based salary system leads to motivated and accountable teaching staff where educators actively engage in professional development and adopt innovative teaching. In contrast, the opposition's best case scenario maintains the current system, which may create a stable environment for teachers, but risks stagnation in teaching practices. So, in conclusion, implementing a performance-based salary system for teachers is a vital step toward enhancing educational quality, driving accountability, and ensuring that all students are equipped with the skills they need to succeed. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, honorable judge, and respected members of the House. While the motion is well-intentioned, aiming to incentivize better teaching and student outcomes, there are reasons why this may backfire, and the proposition ignores such aspects. This proposal fails to account for the complexities of education and the realities faced by teachers in their classrooms. Now, some rebuttals. Now, we claim that the test, like the standardized testing system, can create low self-esteem for the students. This will be extremely worse for the proposition's case because the standardized testing are much more emphasized. Now, the proposition has also claimed that they can change the test so that the teacher doesn't directly talk about their tests. Now, then who makes the test if the teacher doesn't? Like, who's going to make the math test if the math teacher doesn't? Now, also providing rebuttals about the PM's place about incentivizing teacher accountability. While the proposition argues that tying salaries to test results will motivate teachers to improve, this approach may incentivize harmful practices such as teaching to the test. Now, teachers may narrow their focus to only the material covered in standardized tests, neglecting broader, more critical aspects of education, such as creativity, problem solving, and emotional intelligence. Additionally, it also overlooks the fact that a teacher's ability to control or influence a student's test performance is often constrained by external factors like socioeconomic status, personal issues, or maybe learning disabilities. Now, then, what does our world look like? Schools evaluate a teacher's a teaching ability through surveys including students, principal observation, GPA scores, etc., and provide salary based on that result. This provides a scope closest to the ideal of including a teacher's teaching ability, classroom environment, academics, etc. Now, on to my first argument. At its core, the motion fails to recognize the numerous external factors that influence how students perform, factors that are often entirely out of a teacher's control. Let's consider this for a moment. Students come to school with varying backgrounds, experiences, and challenges. Many of them face struggles at home, such as economic hardships, familial instability, etc. Now, some students have the learning disabilities that are not always immediately identifiable or addressed, or lack the resources that allow them to thrive in a standardized testing environment. Under the propositions model, a teacher's salary would fluctuate each year depending on their students' performance on standardized tests. This creates an unfair situation where a teacher's financial well-being is tied to outcomes that may be completely outside their control. Teachers cannot be expected to fix every external issues affecting their students, nor they should be penalized for circumstances that are entirely out of their hands. In contrast, the opposition's model evaluates teachers through a range of methods that capture a fuller picture of their teaching ability. Surveys from students, feedback from principals, and academic performance data such as GPA scores allow for a more nuanced assessment of a teacher's effectiveness. Now, moreover, looking at a national scope rather than being limited to a school, one of the main pitfalls of the proposition's model is the risk of exacerbating educational inequality. Teachers in schools with fewer resources or low-income areas may find themselves unfairly penalized, even if they are working tirelessly to help their students succeed. A teacher in an underfunded school district may have a larger class size, outdated textbooks, and limited access to technology. Their students might not perform well on standardized tests because they simply haven't had the same opportunities or resources as students in wealthier districts. Lastly, the standardized test-based evaluation of a teacher's performance is inherently limited. While standardized tests can measure specific academic skills, they fail to capture the broader, more complex role that teachers play in the classroom. Teachers are not just test prep facilitators; they're mentors, motivators, and guides who help students develop critical thinking, creativity, productivity, and socioeconomic skills, and which are skills that cannot be measured by standardized tests. In contrast, the opposition's model takes into account a wide range of qualities that contribute into effective teaching. Student surveys, for example, can gauge how well a teacher fosters a positive learning environment, encourages student participation, and adapts to individual needs. Now, by providing salary increases based on the comprehensive evaluations, we are incentivizing teachers to develop in a wide variety of areas rather than focusing on a narrow and artificial measure of success. Because of these reasons, I'm more than proud to oppose. Thank you.
Okay. Imagine a world full of spectacular students who score high with an atmosphere full of passionate teachers who input their time wisely on students. This is the world for a proposition team, and we believe this will significantly benefit this generation of kids. Hello, honorable judges, esteemed opponents, and my brilliant teammates. We strongly support the motion this House believes that the salary of teachers should change every year based on the performance of their students in a standardized test. As the second speaker for the government side, I will cover a rebuttal, and my argument and persuade the judge why our world will significantly benefit this generation of students. Firstly, my rebuild. They say this will create low self-esteem. But self-esteem is not created simply by affirmations or participation in activities. It is built through genuine experiences of success, mastery, and the ability to overcome challenges. If we rely solely on external validation or participation trophies, we risk fostering a fragile sense of self-worth that can easily crumble when faced with real-world challenges or failures. Moving on to my rebuttal. They say it's unfair if students disabilities. However, we mentioned that it's not about the overall score. I don't accept your POI. It's about their improvement. If they have improvement, the teacher can still receive a good salary and they can give special and professional classes to tackle these little problems. Therefore, your argument doesn't stand. Moving on to my argument. We believe that linking teacher salaries to student performance creates a system of accountability that encourages teachers to prioritize student learning. When educators know their salaries depend on their students' success, they are more likely to implement effective teaching strategies and engage in continuous improvement. This is true because linking teacher salaries to student performance in standardized tests foster a culture of accountability that is crucial for educational excellence. When teachers understand that their financial well-being is directly influenced by their students' achievements, they are incentivized to take their responsibilities seriously and prioritize the development of effective teaching strategies. This connection encourages educators to actively engage with their students, adapt their lesson plans to meet individual learning needs, and implement innovative instructional methods to enhance student understanding. As a result, teachers are more likely to invest additional hours in lesson preparation, provide targeted assistance during office hours, and create enriching interactive classroom experiences. Furthermore, accountability mechanisms can lead to meaningful evaluation of teaching practices, prompting educators to reflect on their effectiveness and seek continuous improvement. In this way, performance-based pay not only motivates teachers to excel individually, but also contributes to more collaborative and focused educational environment where the ultimate goal is improving student outcomes. By promoting accountability, we can ensure that educators are dedicated to fostering a high quality learning experience for all students, thereby enhancing the overall effectiveness of the educational system. Consider Miss Johnson, a dedicated math teacher at Lincoln High School, who found herself in a pivotal position where the administration implemented the performance pay for process policy, linking her salary directly to her students' performance on standardized tests. Recognizing the weight of this responsibility, Miss Johnson was driven to ensue her students' stride. She committed herself to understanding the unique learning challenges each student faced, dedicating countless hours to develop tailored support strategies. She organized weekly study sessions after school and introduced engaging interactive math games that not only made her learning enjoyable, but also reinforced crucial concepts in a dynamic way. To conclude, we should allow this policy so it can change the world of education. We are proud to propose. Thank you.
A teacher's responsibility is to guide students in the right direction. That's the way students learn independence, and that this guidance shouldn't be chosen by standardized tests because this often blocks creativity and critical thinking of an individual. That is why standardized tests takes a big proportion of a teacher's salary is unjustified because talents of an individual or students are all different. That is why if we want to actually consider responsibility in today's debate, it's better to follow our counter policy. We can actively assess if the teachers are doing the right role as a teacher and if students are able to express their talents with the guidance of the teachers. By protecting the most crucial stakeholders in today's debate, it's a clear up ballot. 3 things in my speech. First of all, some clarifications. Second of all, some rebuttals. Last but not least, our team's final constructive arguments. I want to start off with the clarification there. I think an individual's talent can always be considered with standardized tests because the scope is often narrowed down to academic subjects. That is why individuals often have complaints within these standardized tests. The solution for these complaints should come out of teachers because they should always be the guidelines of the students. Students who are good at coding or arts now have the opportunity to focus on the major because in our role, teachers being the moral guidelines determine their salary. If teachers are able to focus and widen their scope of academics, you'll be able to create a society where teachers and students both become happy as a whole. This is how we win over government's policy because in their policy, teachers are probably going to be focused on primary subjects that only have some proportion of students, which does not motivate students whose major is not one of those primary subjects to study harder. This is how we both help students and teachers as a whole and for all majority of students. Moving on to some rebuttals then. 3 layers. First of all, I think comparing is very problematic at the end of the day because they'll constantly compare compare themselves with others, and this will result in low self-esteem. And this is actively worse on your side because this becomes much more important because this could choose a teacher's salary. But even if we ignore that point, their point is very contradictory because they literally frame that point this comparing point really positively in their case when they literally admit that this is bad and this happens on both sides in their POI response. Since we prove how this worsens on your side, we prove how this point is very contradictory, we bring this point home.
Yeah.
Second of all, if teachers don't make the test, who makes the test? Everything is just so started on government taste, and therefore I think they make this debate really, really wishy-washy at the end of the day, and they don't know what they're defending at the end. But for anything, I'll take the POI.
So you previously mentioned about comparison. Why do you think that comparison won't happen in your world?
Yeah, I know we never said that comparison will not happen in our role, but we told you that comparison is going to be worse on your side because teachers' salary is going to be chosen by standardized tests. As teachers focus more on standardized tests, students will automatically need to focus on primary students who study for primary subjects will need to focus on standardized tests, which actively makes students compare on your side, and that's worse. That's very, very worse on your side, and that's the problem, and that exacerbates the problem under your model. Then moving on to our final argument as to how standardized tests leads to poor guidance. The premise here is quite straightforward. The premise here is that if teachers get focused on standardized tests, this could often lead to a situation where they only focus on their primary subjects such as math, English, or history. This is true because of the simple fact that their salaries get chosen upon only these major primary subjects. Teachers don't feel the intent to focus on students who often do secondary subjects like design or computer or mechanical engineering. This is very, very problematic because this often doesn't follow the guidelines of a teacher. A teacher's role in a school is to guide all the students in the right direction, but then their policy and their model leads to a situation where these guidelines are only equipped to students who only study those primary subjects. This problematic stereotype could often lead to two big issues. First of all, students who study other subjects that do not require primary subjects, they lose interest in school. As the interest towards teachers only go towards students who study primary subjects, they will think that the subject they're studying is not valued at the end of the day. That's the major violation of a teacher because they're not leading all the students in the right way. Judge, we're the only side that can manage the teachers to value on both sides because we are assessing these teachers based on fairness and how they guide all of their students in the right way. But second of all, this further widens the gap between students. Students who study primary subjects will look like students who are helpful for the teacher's career and nice students, where students who study design, for example, will look like a student blocking from a teacher succeeding, which is not the case actually. That is why it's important to treat all students fairly, and that could not be achieved by the teacher's salary. Teacher's salary is determined by the standardized tests that they take. By protecting the students and actively helping teachers follow their role as a teacher and also help them get salary fairly at the end of the day, thus it's more than clear off ballot. Thank you.
In a world where every student deserves a quality education, how can we ensure that the teachers are doing their absolute best? Shouldn't we reward those who are making a real difference in the lives of their students and encourage those who might be falling short to improve? Hi, I'm Lisa, and I'm the third speaker of the proposition side. I stand firmly to support the motion. Firstly, I will give my rebuttals on rebuilding, then some issue analysis, lastly, the clashes. So firstly, I'll give my rebuttal to the opponent. They said that this motion could encourage low self-esteem and tension between the students and the teacher. However, for the student, it is not the increased scholarship of students, but the salary of teachers. And even if it creates tension, this would be another incentive for both the students and teachers to perform well. For teachers, it will raise their teaching quality, and for students, they would be encouraged to do well on their tests. They also mentioned that the teachers will be likely to be teaching the test and narrow the curriculum. However, most standardized tests cover a broad range of content that aligns with the core educational values. And also, the test also covers questions that need critical thinking and creativity skills, like many writing questions that you will need to come up with. And also, there is one giant logical flaw in most of their argument, which is something being mutually exclusive. There are two groups of something being not mutually exclusive in their argument, which is creativity and critical thinking versus the test taking and external factors impact versus the teacher's impact. Creativity and critical thinking skills, like I've explained in my rebuttals, and test taking are not mutually exclusive, as many questions in the test requires both those skills. And external factors and teachers' impact on the students are not mutually exclusive because teachers could design a type of teaching method that suits their students. And also we emphasize in our setup that the teacher's salary would be based on students' improvement, not solely their test score. Now I move on to my clash. The first clash is the external factors versus the teacher impact. They emphasize there is a significant role of external factors, including parental involvement and resources or low income. However, we acknowledge the influence of external factors, but they completely ignore the impact of teachers. The teachers' effectiveness and environment could work as a whole, and the teachers have the power to create an engaging classroom. In our setup, we emphasize that we analyze student performance based on improvements and base the teacher's salary on the students' improvements, and it better isolates teachers' contributions. There are two logical flaws in this argument. So just because external factors like home environment and economical status of the students exist doesn't mean that teacher performance has no impact. Another one I have explained of which is being not mutually exclusive. So they also failed to defend the status quo, where teachers, no matter their teaching quality, are giving the same salary. They only said that how this motion lacks, for example, the fairness and the real teaching quality of teachers. However, they did not explain how the status quo, where some teachers have low teaching qualities, while some teachers they engage in the classroom and work extremely hard to benefit students. They didn't explain how this creates a balance between the students and the teacher, and how this benefits the teachers as well as the students. So according to those points, I proudly propose. Thank you.
Judge, it would be unjustified if someone decides your value based not based on how you did that and your effort, but based on only the result that is not even entirely your responsibility. That is what proposition is trying to do and trying to push, and that is not only fair but also leads to worse circumstances, as we have been arguing. Standardized tests should be balanced with other factors when it comes to judging a teacher, not just be emphasized when it comes to judging the ability and the value of the teacher. So moving on to my two clashes. The first clash is students' standardized test performances a justified proportionate standard to judge the values of teachers? So two reasons why we win this clash. Firstly, I would like to explain how teachers are not fully responsible for students' standardized test scores. So even if the proposition side claims they wouldn't include students who have things like mental disability, there are inherently factors that are out of their control. Why? It is likely that, for example, some teachers might teach students who are economically disadvantaged, which they lack chances to get other things like good academies, or who are extremely talented. Like this, students' background make a different playing field for them, a different start when the teachers start to teach students. So because they're not just like teaching students from babies, they have a different start because they have a different background. Therefore, even if two teachers teach a same amount with the same ability and the same effort, one teacher might have a child who is really talented. On the other hand, another teacher might have many students who are not interested in studying, who is not talented in studying. Like this, there is always a factor that tech teachers cannot control. Therefore, it is not their full responsibility. And secondly, teachers' ability and role is not all about preparing students for standardized tests, because teachers are mentors who have the role to lead students to a better path, a path that fits individual students. They also need to provide education related to diverse experiences and critical thinking. And this kind of factor is sometimes not related to standardized test scores, because standardized test is about answering a question in the same way that the nation organized that as a truth, and it is answering a question fastly in a limited time. So therefore, we clearly win this clash, and winning this clash is a winning point to our team, because it's clearly unjustified to decide someone's value based on something that they are not responsible for. So moving on to my second clash, which is which side can create better guidance from teachers. So the proposition talks about motivation to teachers to teach properly, enhancing accountability of them, but During response to this kind of motivation can be achieved on our side also by our counter policy, which is judging teachers by how teachers teach and why they how they lead or mentor students into a better behavior and better better meaning in life. And secondly, status quo is not likely to change in their world, and their argument is not likely because this is because if teachers get to teach students who are already clearly ready for standardized tests compared to other teachers, they're likely to do not do anything meaningful because their motivation to fulfill their role as a teacher only becomes the money and their salary. So not just moral obligation or satisfaction of themselves. So lastly, this backfires on the proposition side logic. If a teacher made a huge effort to help students to but their students got bad scores because they were unlucky, as we clearly explained, their whole effort would be meaningless and it would discourage that teachers to teach the students in the next year more having a more effort in them. So opposition our side explained it will lead to just obsession to only standardized test scores, which will lead to poor guidance. So firstly, they would discriminate students based on the potential standardized test scores when they because when they see students, they would look at students only by money. So when the talented students would be things that would be people who earn money to them, and students who are not interested in the test would be a students that is blocking their path to money. And secondly, it would lack guidance in terms of critical thinking and things like creativity. And lastly, they would not suggest alternative for students for finding another path besides standardized tests and who are not interested in that kind of test. So therefore, I'm very proud to
Judge. Affirmative exacerbates students' social status, but also scopes this debate in a very narrow way. At the end of the day, we're the only side who proposed a clear-cut counter policy and points that are valid at the end of the day, because we never heard a proper response and up to any of our arguments, and also asserted all of their points and even knifed their own points. But let me go specific and rebut all their points and prove why we bring this debate home. First of all, their case is very contradictory because PM states that comparison and comparing is good in her case, when DPM suddenly comes up to the podium and tells us how this is bad on both sides, and then Whip comes up again and tells us how this motivates students at the end of the day. They started to make their case really wishy-washy and changes their stance every 5 minutes. So whatever perfect good arguments they bring to the floor, it should all fall because they don't even properly know what they're defending. That is how we already win over government, regardless of any good arguments they bring. But let us become generous and also deal with their arguments. Or even if we become generous and take their arguments are very example based, just like DPM's third argument mentioning about his own teacher. He uses his 2 minutes to explain this example about his math teacher, like setting up math board games to help students, but he has absolutely no analysis, which makes it very confusing us to notice what they're defending as to their third argument. But even if we take this point, I think that point is very problematic because your side is supposed to assess teachers based on standardized tests and how the students do. Creating math games and creating subjects that help students and that helps to guide students is exactly our policy, and your side can't claim that policy, and which makes their third argument also very contradictory at the end. But third, we're not defending status quo because we have a counter policy where teachers' salaries are determined by how the teachers guide the students in a fair way, and it helps the majority of the students guide in the right way. Whip just wastes her second clash and totally misunderstands our argument and our counter policy. I think government's problem then is that their points are all contradictory or most likely asserted. Comparatively, we propose a clear-cut policy and stance, counter policy and stance, and also prove why teachers should be why teachers should be assessed on the usual performance and guidance that guides the student in a fair way. That's why whatever good point that reply brings, this debate is a clear up win. I dropped the mic.
Judges and awesome teammates. Today I will tell you why we won today's debate and that what the opposition team argued about today is useless and extremely invalid. Firstly, they kept talking about how unfair things would happen in our world, and we talked about why our world is full of engaging, passionate, and striving students. Unfair won't happen in our world because teachers want everybody to improve. This will not cause a teacher to be biased since she will focus on the whole class instead of individual people. Our third speaker rebutted every argument by the opposition team, and we believe that everything they said is repetition and is not persuasive to me and the judge. Secondly, they are always talking about comparison if this policy is real. Firstly, this is obviously not true. Why do students need to know about this policy? Isn't it just for educators? Students are going to compare both sides because they don't know about this policy and that they don't need to know. They will still compare their test scores, and I believe that our side is better in this case because teachers will lift everybody's test scores and there is no more need for comparison. Opposition team failed to answer my POI and therefore their arguments are invalid. Judge, we already knew that we'd win at the start of the debate. We are bold and clear, while the other team used their fast-paced voice to cover up their awful flaws, and we, as the government side, wisely rebutted them all using logical reasoning. They kept saying that we are wishy-washy, but I believe it's the opposite. All they're saying is full of repetition and mostly useful information, and they obviously didn't see the real world before. They did not give a clash comparison, no rebuilds, and no reasonable POIs. So, to end today's debate, we obviously won today's debate. We heard nothing clear and reasonable from the opposition team, and we are the winners no matter the result, even though we're confident that we are the winners. Thank you.